Hello and welcome to your presentation on ecological relationships, or the different types of relationships among and between organisms and species in an ecosystem. So before you even start the notes, at the very, very top, it says there are blank main types of relationships between organisms within an ecosystem. So there are three main types of relationships between organisms within an ecosystem. We're going to talk about the first category. So you'll go one line down in your notes, and that category is called symbiotic relationships. This is when one or more organisms live in close contact or live with one another. In some symbiotic relationships, we're even going to see organisms that live within one another, like literally inside of another organism. So first, let me just tell you that there are three main types, and the first one is called commensalism. This is a type of symbiotic relationship where one species is going to benefit or have a positive relationship and experience with the relationship, whereas the other species will not be affected at all, not harmed, not hurt. The next type is called mutualism. And by the way, we're going to go into examples of each of these. Mutualism is where both species benefit. It's a win-win for both species involved. And then finally, we have parasitism. And this is where it benefits one species, but it harms the other. It harms the host. So let's do some examples first of commensalism. So commensalism is an example of a positive and then neutral relationship. So one organism is going to benefit, plus sign, and one is not going to be affected at all. So we would have it as neutral or zero. So here are a few examples. We have some large herd animals have birds that live on their backs, and the birds are going to benefit from that commensal relationship, while the large herd animal isn't really going to be affected. The bird's going to eat like bugs and different critters that are on that large animal, and the large animal is not really going to benefit at all, but it also won't be harmed. Here we see burrs. Have you ever had like a burr in your sock when you walk through like a field? So that's another example of a commensal relationship. The plant that has that burr is going to benefit because you are helping to spread its seed around, its genetic material around, and you are not really affected. You're not really harmed. You're not really benefiting from the relationship either. And finally, another example could be the clownfish and sea anemone. The sea anemone doesn't really benefit from the relationship, but it is commensal because the clownfish does, as protection, and it also has cleaning services from the anemone. So now let's talk about mutualism. This would be a plus-plus or a positive relationship because both of the organisms are going to benefit. If we think about pollinators, the bee benefits from getting nutrition from the flower. The flower benefits because the bee is going to spread its pollen and help fertilize other plants. We have this really cool example with crocodiles and the dicop bird. So the dicop bird will actually go into the mouth of the crocodile and help clean the crocodile's mouth and teeth. The dicop bird benefits because it's going to be getting nutrition, and the crocodile benefits because it's going to have a clean mouth that's not overrun with bacteria. So it's a mutual relationship. And we see a similar relationship between some of the birds of Africa and that live specifically mutualistically with rhinoceros. So then let's finally talk about the third type of symbiotic relationship. Not all of them are positive. Parasitism is where one of the organisms benefits, plus sign, and one is harmed or hurt, negative sign. So for example, we have HIV. In HIV, we are the host. We will be harmed by that relationship. But HIV, the virus, it's going to benefit from being inside of a host. It's going to use our red blood cells and actually burst our red blood cells to spread the viral information all through our body. So again, harmful for us, but very, very helpful for the virus that's trying to grow and spread. Another example we have here would be tapeworm. And in this case, it's tapeworm in the human foot. So the host, or the foot in this case, is being harmed. But the parasite, the tapeworm, is benefiting from living inside the foot. It's getting nutrition. It has a place that to live that's protected. So one is benefiting while one is being harmed. So then let's talk about another category of relationships. You go down one more in your notes, and these are called competitive relationships. And these are where organisms are going to compete for important resources such as food, shelter, and mates. So, when we think about organisms that are competing, um, some of these organisms are going to be from the same species, fighting for females, fighting for shelter, fighting for available food. But we're also going to see that we see competition between species, so two different species. So, let's take a look. So, let's also just look right here where it says may have negative effects on one another. You are going to fill that in on your notes. So sometimes competition can have a negative effect on one of the organisms who essentially loses the competition. So let's take a look at the first type. So there are two main types. The first is intra-specific. Those are going to be between members of the same species. So a male baboon fighting with another male baboon. That would be intra-specific competition. Then we have interspecific. This would be between two or more species. So this would be two different types of organisms, for example, fighting for the same resource. So we could say like an orca or killer whale might be hunting for the same type of food or resource as a great white shark, like seals, for example. So let's take a look at intra-specific competition in a little bit more detail. Again, this is the same species competing with one another. So this is important because it's an important factor in limiting the population size of a species. You can't have an unlimited amount of species in one area or an unlimited population size in one area. A great example, polar bears, these are large, fierce predators. And so you can't, and they need a lot of food. So you can't have, 5,000 polar bears in one small ecosystem. They're going to be competing with each other for the limited amount of resources. And in some cases, it doesn't necessarily mean that, like, let's say some polar bears are fighting for territory, doesn't necessarily mean that the polar bear is going to die, the one that loses. What might happen is that the polar bear just might move to a different region or area or hunting ground so that there's a more even distribution of resources for both of those polar bears. But then we have interspecific competition. This would be the competition between different species. So as the population of one species is increasing, interspecific competition is going to limit the density of the competing species. So, for example, if you have organisms like if we have deer in an ecosystem as well as elk, deer and elk, they are both going to be eating and fighting for the same resource, which would be grasses, low-lying shrubs. And we can't have an infinite amount of deer and an infinite amount of elk in one area. They're going to be competing with one another for those resources. And the ones that don't get the resources are going to die, which limits the population, makes it so that the population size does not explode. Let's talk about the very last type of predator-prey relationship, and that is type of ecological relationship, and that's going to be our predator-prey. This is when one organism consumes or eats a second organism. When you fill in your notes, if you don't know what consumes mean, in parentheses, add the word eats. So here are some examples. We have on the Serengeti in Africa, we have a predator-prey relationship, the predator being the lion, the prey being the zebra. We have the fox and the rabbit, right? The fox being the predator, the rabbit being the prey. Or we have the spider and whatever bug it seems to have captured, the spider being the predator, and the bug that has been caught is the prey. But I want you to also remember that eating plants, that's part of the predator-prey relationship. A deer is the predator, the grass is the prey. When you eat a salad, you are the predator, and the lettuce and the carrots and the tomatoes are the prey. Because remember that plants are also living things. So this is your next job. If you did not do this as you went along, here's our big summary. Three big types of relationships, again, between individual organisms within a community. We have symbiotic relationships, where one or more organisms that live in close contact or with one another, even sometimes inside one another. Competitive relationships, where organisms are competing for important resources like food, shelter, or mates. And remember, we have those two subtypes. You can go back to your notes to remember. And then, of course, we have predator prey, which is where one organism consumes another organism. So if you did not do so as you went through the video, please go back and provide two examples for each of the different types of relationships, meaning two relationships of commensalism, two examples of parasitism, two examples of an intra-specific relationship. And again, if you need any help, go back through my video, but you can also find your own unique examples.